A wealthy millionaire marries an obese woman as part of a bet, but what happened next ended up changing his entire life. What started as a joke among men trying to boost their egos turned into something that made him question everything: his pride and what love truly means. Before we dive into the story, we'd love to know a little about you. What are you doing while listening to this? Driving, relaxing, cooking? Drop a comment and tell us more about you. Now, let's find out what really happened. Grace wasn't the kind of woman who'd make someone turn their head on the street. She didn't wear tight bodycon dresses, didn't walk in 4-inch heels, and definitely didn't have the kind of figure that made people say wow at red carpet events. But Grace had something that stayed with you. Maybe it was her eyes, bright and unwavering, or her voice, calm, never trying too hard to be noticed. Or maybe it was the way she never apologized for her presence, even when the world kept trying to make her feel like she should. At 28, Grace lived a simple life, working as a coordinator at a community health center during the day and spending her evenings reading to her mother, who was battling chronic heart disease. With an income just enough to get by, she never dreamed of 5-star hotels, haute couture dresses, or convertible sports cars. But that didn't mean she wasn't good enough. She just didn't live by anyone else's standards. That's why, when she walked into that high society charity event that night, she became the subject of quiet chuckles. Landon Pierce entered like he was made for the runway. Expensive suit, silver watch glinting under the chandelier, a half smile on his face. He was the only son of the Pierce and Hamilton empire, and his name was always in the headlines. A millionaire CEO known as the man who belonged to no one. Landon walked into the ballroom like he owned it. Friends surrounded him, laughing, red wine glasses swaying. He caught sight of Grace from across the room, the woman in a simple black dress, standing by the buffet table, picking up a piece of cheese like she was choosing a book from a library. "You dare?" One of his friends laughed, slapping Landon on the shoulder. "Dare what?" "Propose to her. Within 30 days, actually marry her." "Just because she's bigger than the usual standard?" Landon raised an eyebrow. "No, because she's the last thing anyone would expect from you. She's your anti-type." A wave of laughter broke out. Landon stayed quiet for a few seconds, but what got triggered in his mind wasn't humor. It was his competitive instinct. He was always the one on top. From school to the boardroom, from the trading floor to the gym, he couldn't stand being the one people doubted. And those friends, even if they were joking, had just implied there was one thing he didn't have the guts to do. "There's nothing I don't dare to do, only things I haven't felt like doing yet," he thought to himself. To Landon, that challenge felt like a slap to the ego wearing a crown. He didn't see Grace as a person, at least not in that moment, but as a project to prove a point. And in that instant, he made up his mind. He would marry her, and he would shut them all up. Grace had no idea she was the subject of a bet. She just sensed someone approaching, with a half smile and a gleam in his eye that felt both charming and daring. "Excuse me, mind if I sit here?" he asked. She shrugged. "The chairs don't have name tags. Go ahead." "What's your name?" "Grace." "Grace," he repeated, thinking it over, then smiled. "That's a very gentle name." "You trying to make a joke about my size?" "No, I just think it's a name worth remembering." For the first time in years, Grace didn't brush off the attention. She didn't blush, didn't get flustered. She looked Landon straight in the eye and smiled, a confident smile that threw him off just a bit. Over the next 3 weeks, Landon did what his friends called insane. He pursued Grace, like it was fate. Morning texts, flowers delivered to her workplace, dinner dates without a trace of mockery. Grace, cautious as ever, started to feel something. Not the cheesy romance novel kind of flutter, but curiosity. Because for the first time in her life, a man like him seemed genuinely interested. But she wasn't naive. She had been the fix-it project for guys trying to prove they were decent. She had been dated on a dare before. And this time, if that's what it was, she wasn't going to walk away quietly. In the 4th week, Landon got down on one knee in the middle of the city square, in front of hundreds of people, with a diamond ring in hand. "Grace Turner," he said, eyes locked on hers, "will you make me the luckiest man alive?" The crowd clapped, Bystanders held up their phones. The whole world seemed to be watching a viral moment unfold. Grace was silent for a long second. Then she stepped forward and took the mic from a nearby musician. Her voice rang out, clear and steady. I don't know if this is love or a performance, but if you're willing to bet it all on me, then I'll make sure this game is unforgettable, every single second of it. Let's see what Grace does to make this game worth remembering. Grace didn't quite remember how she nodded. She only knew that when the applause roared through the square like a storm, when the cold ring slipped onto her finger, and when Landon smiled like some perfect fairy tale prince, her heart felt empty. A week earlier, her mother had collapsed for the third time that month. The hospital said they needed to replace the heart assist device. The cost was nearly out of reach for anyone working at a community health center, let alone someone who lived as frugally as Grace. She had planned to sell her worn-down apartment, take out emergency loans, maybe even beg the father who abandoned her and her mom when she was 13. But life isn't as kind as the movies. Every door she knocked on stayed shut. And then Landon made his offer. We'll get married. No need to be in love. I just want you to say yes. I'll take care of all the wedding costs, legal paperwork, even the finances. Those words echoed in her head like a contract sealed by fate. No romance, no promises, not even love. Just a strange offer from a man far too sure of himself. Grace didn't trust him, but she trusted reality. Her mother needed saving. The wedding happened so quickly, outsiders thought it was a whirlwind romance. Headlines read, Millionaire CEO secretly marries mystery woman. Identity shocks financial world. No one knew who Grace was. And even more confusing, no one could figure out why Landon chose her. She stood in the chapel, wearing a rushed custom-made wedding dress. It hugged her curves just right, hiding the part of her back she always felt insecure about. Her makeup was soft, her hair pulled into a high bun, a simple pearl necklace at her neck. She wasn't dazzling, but there was something about her you couldn't look away from. Maybe because she wasn't pretending to be happy. Landon, as always, was perfect. He held her hand and said exactly what the officiant asked. Not a word more, not a word less. Just enough for the crowd to clap, for the photographer to capture that lover's gaze moment. After the reception, they returned to the penthouse Landon had set up ahead of time, the one the press dubbed a luxurious love nest in the heart of the city. Grace stepped in and saw it all, the marble floors, the rose-filled bathtub, all stunning, yet cold. Your room's on the left, mine's at the end of the hall, Landon said without looking back. Don't you think we should talk a little? She asked. He paused, hands still in his pockets, shoulders tilted slightly, like he was busy calculating an important deal. Grace, this is a contract marriage, not an emotional boot camp. We each play our part. No one owes anyone an explanation. So, can we at least call this a team? He turned to face her, eyes locked on hers, eyes cold as stainless steel. You're not a partner, you're just the condition I needed to prove a point. The wedding night ended with the sound of a door closing. No wine, no candles, no one lying next to anyone, just Grace, sitting silently on a bed far too big, staring into the emptiness ahead. She didn't cry. Grace wasn't the kind of person who cried easily. She just sighed, a quiet, restrained sigh pressed deep in her chest. Mom, did I do the right thing? She wondered silently, her hand clutching the edge of the bedsheet. The next morning, the media was flooded with wedding photos. Landon was praised as a man who broke past society's standards. Grace, on the other hand, was picked apart. Old photos from when she was heavier, outdated dresses she wore during charity work. Her social media was filled with cruel comments. This is the bride? Looks more like a nanny. Another rich guy's bet? She read every word. Didn't respond. She just remembered. That night, she stood on the balcony of the 35th floor apartment, looking out at the city lights. Behind her, Landon had just ended a call. She heard laughter. A familiar male voice came through the phone. You really went all in. 10 out of 10. No one's ever pulled off a wedding like that. Glasses clinked. A toast. Grace turned around, facing Landon. For the first time, in control. I don't know what point you're trying to prove, or to who. But if you think I'm going to break just because you married me as some kind of joke, you picked the wrong woman. Landon didn't respond. He looked at her for a few seconds, then turned away. Grace watched him go, and one thought echoed in her mind. I'm gonna turn your game into a lesson you'll never forget. Grace slowly got used to the rhythm of life in that quiet, cold penthouse. Not in a way that felt like enjoyment, but more like adaptation. She woke up at exactly 6:30 a.m., took light walks around the balcony, made tea, read the news. Landon was rarely home. He left early for work, came back late, never announced his schedule, never left a note. They lived like two tenants sharing a roof, except the press still called them an admirable couple. She knew this wasn't a marriage, but she hadn't expected it to feel this empty. One morning, while making tea, she noticed the kitchen clock blinking. But it wasn't a normal blink. It flashed in a pattern, repeating, like it was recording movement. Grace didn't say anything, but she started paying closer attention. The mirror in the dressing room had a slightly shifted frame, not how it looked the last time she checked. Another time, her phone restarted in the middle of the night, even though she hadn't touched it. And strangest of all was Carla, the housekeeper. A quiet woman who always appeared right after Grace left a room, like she was timing it. Grace wasn't paranoid, but she was smart, and she started asking herself, who's watching who? She began testing things, placing a small safety pin in the edge of a cabinet, clipped tightly. By morning, it was gone. She stuck a tiny sticker under the bathroom mirror. A day later, it had been peeled off and stuck back, just slightly off. There were no obvious cameras in the house, but Grace knew, whatever was operating in this apartment, it wasn't just luxury. One afternoon, she pretended to forget her phone and doubled back unexpectedly. Carla was speaking to a man through a Bluetooth earpiece. His voice came through loud and clear. She doesn't suspect anything, right? Landon wants the video footage from the living room last night. Grace said nothing. She turned away as if she hadn't heard a thing. But inside, something locked into place. She didn't rage. She didn't tear the place apart like some dramatic movie character. She quietly opened her laptop, researched encryption tools, created a brand new social media account under a completely different name. She started documenting her life, not as complaints or accusations, but as a personal narrative. The account, called Grace Under Fire, began to gain followers drawn to her honest, sharp writing. She also signed up for online classes, finance, psychology, media. Landon didn't notice. He thought she just stayed home, playing the part of a quiet, compliant wife. But in the shadows, she was shedding her old skin, piece by piece. One night when Landon came home late, Grace was still at the dining table. Warm light pooled on her shoulders. "Would you like some tea?" she asked, her voice soft as mist. Landon looked up. He seemed a little surprised to see her still awake. "Yeah, thanks." She poured the tea and set it in front of him. Asked nothing more. No questions, no sulking, no warnings. It was that silence that unsettled him more than any accusation ever could. He stared at her for a long moment, then got up from the table. But just as he turned away, he heard her say, "You can monitor everything I do, but you'll never understand what I'm thinking." Landon froze. She didn't wait for a response. She simply stood, walked toward the hallway, and didn't look back. That night, for the first time in their strange marriage, Landon couldn't sleep. As for Grace, she opened her laptop and typed a new status on her anonymous account. "They called me a gamble, but I'm becoming the only player who actually knows the rules." And that was the night Grace knew one thing for sure. If this marriage was a game, she wasn't going to walk away quietly. 3 months after the wedding, Grace's figure was exactly the same. No starving herself, no sunrise runs, no forcing herself into a version of deserving defined by society. She ate well, but never skipped a meal. She loved her morning waffles, almond milk at noon, and a cup of hot cocoa whenever it rained. The only thing that changed was her eyes, brighter, deeper, with not a trace of resignation left in them. Landon started to notice, not because she became traditionally beautiful, but because she became unpredictable. One day, just as he was about to leave the house, Grace asked, "Do you know the difference between being stared at and making people pay attention?" Landon frowned. "No. It's choice," she said. "I don't need to change myself to be seen as worthy. I just need to make sure I'm impossible to ignore." With that, she stepped into an online meeting, her voice so sharp and professional that Landon froze in the hallway. Grace had enrolled in an online certification program in data analysis and strategic marketing. She studied early mornings and late nights, color-coded her notes, practiced speaking in professional English, and even joined industry forums under the nickname GT Reframe. No one knew that the woman once mocked online for her weight was now the one advising a healthy food brand chain on how to build a loyal customer community. With each passing day, Grace pulled in something new, a skill, an opportunity, a network. But she didn't tell Landon, not because she was hiding anything, but because he never asked. One day, while preparing a presentation slide for an upcoming workshop, Grace opened a new search tab, Beginner Home Video Studio Setup. She was starting to plan a podcast channel focused on the power of living unapologetically. The name, Unapologetic Grace. In her first videos, she didn't talk about Landon, didn't mention marriage. She just shared tips on choosing outfits for plus-size bodies, on what it feels like to walk into a room and know every eye is silently waiting for you to apologize for not fitting the mold. The channel started gaining views. Followers sent messages like, "Thank you, I wore a dress today for the first time in 3 years. Your talk made me cry in the middle of the night." She read every message. She didn't brag about them to anyone. But when she got an invitation to speak at a TEDx conference in Boston, she knew it was time to walk onto that stage in shoes she chose, not one someone else gave her. Landon started hearing her name from other people. A friend in PR said, "Your wife's talk at the event was incredible. I didn't realize she was that sharp." An investor sent over a podcast link. "This woman has serious potential to inspire. Might be worth connecting." Landon didn't react, just nodded. But that night, he quietly opened YouTube, typed in Unapologetic Grace, and watched 3 videos back to back. In the second video, Grace looked straight into the camera and said, "People often ask me, why don't you lose weight to feel more confident?" And I asked them back, why should I change myself just to be accepted by those who refuse to accept me? Her voice wasn't bitter. It wasn't rebellious. It was direct, smooth, and needed no justification. Landon shut the video off halfway through, not quite sure why his hand had tightened into a fist. He had never felt so outside of a story before. The next morning, he meant to say something to her at breakfast, but Grace had already left. Her schedule was fuller than he'd realized. A week later, she came home holding a gift box, a perfume sample from a new feminist brand. They wanted her to be their brand ambassador. This time, she didn't keep it to herself. "What do you think?" she asked, holding up the bottle, a soft blend of wood and vanilla in the air. Landon took it, reading the small words printed on the label. "Brave is beautiful." "Fitting," he said, handing it back. Grace smiled, not because of the compliment, but because she knew. Landon had stopped seeing her as a gamble, but as someone slowly slipping out of his control. If you were in a marriage just to serve as a backdrop for someone else's reputation, then would you choose surgery, lose weight, and try to fit the mold they expect? Or would you do what Grace did, stand your ground, and make them see you, even when they don't want to? Which path would you take? Let Love Stories know your thoughts in the comments below. Landon walked into the boardroom in the worst shape he'd been in since taking over the company. Leaked documents, stock dropping. The media was circling with rumors that his firm had manipulated customer data. And the worst part? The name signed at the bottom of the leak was his former assistant, the one he'd fired after a murky internal dispute. The meeting dragged on for 3 hours, yet no real solutions came out of it. Investors were losing patience. The legal team kept warning of a potential class action lawsuit. Landon came home with his head pounding. He uncorked a bottle of wine, filled a glass, and drank it in one go. Grace wasn't there. Lately, she'd been out more than him, her schedule busier than his. The strange thing was, he realized he felt empty. Around 9 p.m., Grace walked in, laptop in hand, blazer draped casually over her shoulder. "You still haven't figured out how to handle the data leak, have you?" she asked, placing the laptop on the dining table. Landon looked up. "You already know?" Grace sat down across from him. "Nothing stays hidden on the internet for long." He didn't ask why she cared. He was used to being treated like he had to go it alone. But then she opened the laptop, pulled up a data flow chart, showing system bottlenecks, internal vulnerabilities, along with a media strategy, A short video in a confession-style format. Honest, direct, owning the mistake and promising change. Not to justify, she said, but to get ahead of the narrative. Landon stayed silent for 15 seconds after she finished presenting. When did you learn all this? While living with someone who never asked questions. He didn't argue. He didn't have the energy to. The next day, Landon followed her exact suggestion. The confession video went live at 9 a.m. By noon, the media narrative shifted from fraudulent CEO to CEO faces crisis with honesty. Social media support surged. Investors canceled their emergency withdrawal meetings. That evening, Landon stood in the kitchen, making tea for someone else for the first time in his life. He carried the cup to Grace's office. She was adjusting her TEDx presentation. "Ginger tea. You've had a bit of a cough lately," he said. Grace paused for a moment, then took it. "Thanks." Landon didn't walk away. He stood there, like he had something to say but didn't know where to start. "That day in the square," he said, "I didn't mean to hurt you." Grace didn't look up. "But you knew what you were doing." "I thought I was playing to win." She cut in. "And I was the prize?" Landon gave a quiet, regretful smile. "No, not now." Grace set her laptop aside and looked him straight in the eye. "Then what am I now?" Landon took a deep breath. "You're the one I'm afraid to lose. Because you knew me when I was at my lowest, and you never needed me to prove anything." Grace stayed quiet. Then she asked one simple, steel-edged question. "If tomorrow you lost everything, your name, your company, your wealth, would you still hold on to me with nothing left to prove?" He didn't answer right away. And in that silence, Grace nodded, like she'd just confirmed something she needed to know. The next morning, she placed an envelope on his desk. Inside was the divorce agreement. "I'm not angry, and I don't regret anything," she said. "I just want to leave while I'm still whole." Landon took the envelope. His hand clenched around it, but he said nothing. "I was once a part of your game," she said, her voice soft but steady, "but I wasn't born to be a pawn." He looked at her, trying to stay composed. "You're not a pawn. You're the only one who ever made me want to play for real." Grace smiled. "Too bad that by the time you were ready to play for real, I no longer wanted a seat at the table." She left that day. No big suitcase, no tearful goodbye. Just a woman walking on her own 2 feet, stepping out of what had once been a gilded cage, returning to a space where she could breathe and simply be herself. As for Landon, for the first time in his life, he couldn't control the outcome of the game. And that was the kind of loss that kept him awake for many nights after. Some people only start to love when the other has already learned how to love themselves. But sadly, feelings don't always show up on time. And when love arrives too late, it's like an apology after the verdict. Sincere, but not enough to erase the damage. What about you? If someone once looked down on you, then came back with a genuine heart, would you be calm enough to listen? Or strong enough to walk away? Let us know what you think in the comments. Landon sat in the familiar leather chair in his office, staring at the dark, silent screen of the laptop in front of him. The numbers, the meetings, the quarterly plans, all of it blurred together, like white noise that no longer soothed anything. Since Grace left, he had lost something he didn't even realize he had, a presence that made silence feel full instead of empty. He used to think he only missed having a safe anchor, but day by day it became clearer. What he'd lost was the one person who had seen him at his weakest and still chose to stay. Until one day, she didn't choose him anymore. 3 weeks after she left, he went to the community health center where Grace used to work. They told him she had quit. He went to her old apartment, the one where her mother used to live, and the neighbors said they had moved out a while ago. No one knew where to. He tried calling, over and over. No one answered. Landon, the man who once closed million-dollar deals in 48 hours, who could sway entire boards with a single meeting, was now sending an email with the subject line, "I'm sorry, even if you never read this." The world still saw him as a success, but only he knew exactly where he had failed. Then one day, he saw her face by chance on a street-side banner ad. Not the airbrush kind, not dressed in glamour. It was a close-up portrait, calm eyes, a soft smile. The words beneath it read, unapologetic, unfiltered, undeniable. Landon stared at the image for 10 minutes, unable to look away. He went home and opened YouTube, searched for unapologetic Grace. The first video had over 500,000 views. In it, Grace said, "I'm not a victim. I'm just someone who once let others define my worth. But today I'm taking that definition back, in my own voice." He watched every single video in one night. The more he watched, the more he understood. She hadn't just left him, she had left the version of herself that tolerated him. The next day, he went to the talk where Grace was scheduled to speak. Sat in the very back row, waited. Grace walked on stage in a simple white suit, no flashy jewelry, no need for it. She didn't speak about love, she spoke about boundaries, about living truthfully and never apologizing for it. When the event ended, he didn't rush toward her. He waited as she stepped off stage, walked down the aisle, and began to exit the hall. "Grace." She turned around, calm, unsurprised. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice steady, smooth as still water. "To say I'm sorry, not because I want you to come back, but because you deserve to hear it." Grace looked at him. No bitterness, no warmth either. "You once said I was just a condition to prove something," she replied. "So now tell me, who are you when there's no one left to prove anything to?" Landon didn't answer. He just exhaled, slow and heavy. "I didn't come here to win," he said. "I came to accept losing." Grace nodded. A small, quiet nod. She turned away. But just before she stepped out the door, she paused. "I don't hate you, Landon. I just learned that sometimes forgiveness isn't about giving someone else another chance. It's about giving myself a peaceful ending." And she walked away, without looking back. And he stood there, in a room slowly emptying, feeling, for the first time, completely filled with truth. 1 year later, autumn had arrived in New York. The leaves turned like a silk carpet dyed in deep brown, fiery orange, and golden yellow. The crisp air made people slow down, remember, and really listen. And today, inside a hall at the Manhattan Cultural Center, hundreds sat in silence, watching a woman step onto the stage in a fitted black dress, hair swept into a high bun, and eyes that didn't need the spotlight to shine. Grace Turner, founder of the Unapologetic brand, one of the year's most influential voices. She stepped forward, not looking at the cameras, not at the event organizers. Her eyes searched the crowd, and found him. Landon, 4th row, left side, alone, not hiding in the crowd, but not hiding himself either. Their eyes met for a brief moment, but just long enough for both of them to know. All the things left unsaid no longer needed to be spoken. Grace turned to face the auditorium. Today's speech wasn't about some thrilling journey or glamorous failure. It was about the quiet power of living true to yourself, even when others once tried to define you by their standards. "There was a time I thought I had to be thinner, quieter, softer to be accepted," she said, her voice clear and steady. "But then I realized if I keep reshaping myself to fit everyone I meet, I'll lose who I am, for good." The room erupted in applause. But Landon didn't clap. He just watched her, as if committing every expression on her face to memory, as if at last he understood the worth of what he once had and never knew how to hold. After the speech, Grace stepped off the stage and into the backstage area, where the award was handed to her, where congratulations poured in. Flowers, hugs, flashes from cameras. But only one person made her pause. Landon stood near the exit. He didn't push forward, didn't call her name. Grace walked slowly in that direction. She didn't smile. She wore no expression for show. "Do you have a minute?" he asked, his voice, for the first time, a beat lower than hers. Grace tilted her head slightly, as if weighing the ask. "Just a few minutes," he added. "I'm not here to take anything back." She nodded. They stepped out onto the balcony beside the building, where the city glowed beneath a darkened sky. "I follow your channel," Landon said, hands in his pockets, like he was holding himself back from saying too much. "Every video?" Grace looked at him. No reaction. "I'm not hoping you'll come back," he continued. "I just want you to know you've done something no one in my world ever has, made people look at themselves differently." A soft breeze moved through. She pulled her collar up. "Thank you," she said. "But I didn't do it for you. I did it for all the versions of Grace who once thought they weren't enough." Landon nodded. "I know." They stood in silence. No promises. No neat conclusions. Before leaving, Landon turned back. "If one day you allow it, I'd like to stand behind you, as a supporter, nothing more." Grace didn't answer. She just looked at him, eyes not wet, not hard, just the calm gaze of someone who had walked through the storm and hadn't lost herself. That look was the final word. And Landon understood. Sometimes forgiveness isn't spoken. It's simply being able to see each other without the pain. He turned away. She turned back. And New York kept breathing quietly, as if recording a final scene, one that didn't need music to mean something. They turned in opposite directions. No hug, no promises, but also no bitterness. Just two people who crossed paths at the right moment, but the wrong time. What about you? After everything they've been through, do you hope Grace and Landon will somehow find their way back to each other? Or do you believe that sometimes understanding is enough, even if it doesn't lead to staying? As for me, I'll admit I've got a soft spot for sincere apologies and quiet love. It's easy for me to give people a second chance. Anyone else on that same team? Let me know I'm not the only soft-hearted one out here. Because truth is, all of us at some point have been a version of Grace. Judged, underestimated, forced to choose, shrink to fit, or stand tall and take up space. And maybe, just like Landon, there was someone in your life too. Someone you only realized truly saw you after they were gone. Love doesn't always end with a happy ending, but it always leaves something deep enough to grow from. A lesson, self-worth, or sometimes a quiet kind of forgiveness. Have you ever stood where Grace stood? Or maybe, like Landon, you felt regret when it was already too late? Share your story in the comments. We read every word with all our heart. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next journey here on Love Stories. Because sometimes, all it takes is one story to remind you that real feelings still have a place in this world. Thank you for staying with us until the end. See you next time.